So I want to welcome you today. I'm Suzanne Kavik. I'm the president of the League of Women Voters. So welcome to our forum today. It's an educational forum on the form-based code update and rezoning in the Chappaqua Hamlet. I want to remind everybody that the League is a grassroots organization. It promotes the active and informed participation of all citizens in government. Voter education is one of our most important functions. And we've been a recognized leader in good government issues such as election and campaign reform. And I just want to be clear, this is an informational session. The League does not support or not support this particular action that we're learning about. This is in its infancy from what I understand. We just wanted to make sure that the public is aware. This event is being videotaped and live streamed, so you'll be able to see it again or tell your friends about it. Today, our information is going to be presented by our town supervisor, Ivy Poole, and our director of planning, Sabrina at Charney Hall. So you'll have the opportunity to have your questions answered after the presentation. So I'd like to welcome and introduce Ivy.
Thanks, Suzanne. So thanks. This is actually a really great turnout. I'm really excited to see so many faces in the room and people who are interested in learning more about what the town is doing with the rezoning of the Chappaqua Hamlet and the creation of what we call a form-based code. We've been talking a lot recently about where we are in the process, and Sabrina's going to walk you through where we are in terms of our process and how we're moving forward with this. But we wanted to have today's session, and I want to say thank you to the League of Women Voters for agreeing to host this on our behalf. We wanted to have this session today so that we could sort of reset for folks maybe who weren't engaged last year when this process kicked off back in May of 2019, or over the summer, last summer, when we had some public sessions and viewed sort of one of the early drafts of the code together. So we wanted to have a session where we could bring people in and sort of rewind the clock a little bit and just talk about what we're doing and why we're doing it, and be able to respond to some questions really generally about what we're doing on behalf of the Hamlet. So I thought maybe a good place to start, and before I do, I also wanted to acknowledge the other folks in the room who have been a part of the team of folks who have been working really kind of week in and week out on what we're developing. So Lauren Levin, who's a member of our town board, Jason Lichtenthal just walked in the room, also a town board member, Bill Spade, who's a local architect and has been a member of our downtown working group. Am I missing anybody? And so those are the folks who've been involved kind of on a weekly and regular basis, and so I thank all of you for being here, and I hope that when we get to the sort of Q&A portion of today that you guys will feel free to jump in and help me answer the questions that I know everybody came to be able to ask us, so thanks. So I thought maybe I would just start by talking a little bit about why we're doing what we're doing, because we've really been focused recently on the what, and so I thought I would talk a little bit about the why we're doing what we're doing. So back in 2017, right, the town passed and adopted its comprehensive plan. And one of the core principles that's discussed in the comprehensive plan is the location for future development. So wanting to make sure that we locate future development where we have adequate infrastructure to support that development. And conversely, if you flip that idea on its head, what we're also saying there is that we want to limit development in places where adequate infrastructure doesn't exist. So when you take a look at our quiet residential neighborhoods, we want to protect those and limit development in our residential neighborhoods by concentrating that development where we have infrastructure. And that's really what we've done here with the downtown infrastructure and streetscape project. We've created the conditions, we've built the infrastructure to be able to support concentrated development in our hamlets, which means not in our neighborhoods, right? So other communities, obviously, along the Metro North, the Harlem line and the Metro North, are looking at development, transit-oriented development, it's called, right? This is a concept that we've been hearing a lot about and a lot of communities are considering right now. So we want to be able to create a vibrant, walkable, hamlet with integrated and mixed uses. So when you hear that phrase, transit-oriented development, that's what we are talking about. And we recognize that there are environmental benefits to building transit-oriented development. It is not only that we are thinking about the economic development value of rezoning the hamlet, we're also thinking about it from an environmental perspective as well. We know that the type of living that transit-oriented development promotes is a more sustainable way of living. And that's where we're sort of gently moving towards in the future. Okay. Rezoning will also engender diversified entertainment, retail, and civic opportunities in the hamlet to make the Chappaqua hamlet more of a destination, both for people who are living in town and also for neighboring communities. So I think most residents would agree that we want to see a more vibrant hamlet with more places to go, more nightlife. Whether that means, and when I say nightlife, I don't mean, New York City going out to the clubs. What I mean is a place where you can go at 8 p.m. on a summer evening to get an ice cream cone with your kids at night, or a place where you can go with your spouse to have a date night out on the town, right? So those are the kinds of things we're talking about in terms of nightlife and revitalization of the hamlet so that we have those kinds of destination experiences for ourselves and for folks in neighboring communities as well. We want to say, we want folks who live in Armonk to say, hey, let's go out to Chappaqua tonight and have dinner, right? So in order to accomplish those kinds of goals, what we need to be able to do is to create the feet on the street. So this is the idea of having people living downtown and people coming into the downtown and walking around. That's what creates sort of vibrancy, and that's what we're trying to do through this process as well. Another thing that we're looking to accomplish through the rezoning is to be able to provide an increased range of housing types, right? To increase the affordability, to add diversity, and to be able to meet the needs of a larger segment of the population, right? So when you take a look at the type of housing that we have today in the Chappaqua hamlet and sort of more broadly in Newcastle, we have a lot of housing that's in a very narrow range. We have a lot of houses that hover around that $1 million mark, right? Single family homes. We don't have a lot of housing stock that meets the needs of young families who are looking to move up to the suburbs from New York City. We don't have a lot of housing that meets the needs of people who work in this community, our teachers, our public employees, etc. We don't have a lot of housing that meets the needs of empty nesters. Your kids have left home, you're potentially looking to downsize, but you'd like to be able to stay in this community. Also for seniors. So the type of housing that we're looking to create in the hamlet fits this sort of gap that we have today in terms of our housing stock in Newcastle. One of the other things we're going to be able to accomplish with the rezoning is to give an aesthetic sort of improvement, have improved aesthetics in our hamlet over what exists there today. To be able to give it, a continued facelift. We did a lot of that with the streetscape. We're on a good path there. There's more that we can do. Creating the form-based code that we're going to hear about in just a moment gives us some control over the design and the aesthetics of what gets developed and what gets built in our downtown so that it has a very sort of consistent, repeatable look and feel where things are integrated. It doesn't mean that everything is exactly the same. There are a lot of opportunities within bands, but it means that things look consistent and fit together so that we have this sort of improved aesthetic quality to our hamlet. And the last thing that we're looking to accomplish through the rezoning and the things that we've been talking about related to the form-based code is thinking about what are the parking needs that exist today and how can we meet the future needs that will be coming at us with some of the development that we're looking at having in the hamlet. So taking a hard look at our parking situation and also at our traffic. So we know already where some of the traffic problems exist today. we're also thinking about where those traffic needs are and how those are gonna change going forward, and making sure that we create a code that plans for both our parking and our traffic needs going forward. So I've said a lot, and Sabrina's gonna drill down into a lot of those topics, but I wanted to give everybody a sense of, I say a lot, that I'm really excited about this work, and that I think that there's a lot of benefit to our community in what we're doing. And so I did just want to start off by highlighting some of the things that I'm personally very excited about when it comes to the effort that we've kicked off here. So with that said, I'll turn it over to Sabrina. She'll walk you through sort of that overview that I described, and then we're going to welcome your questions after that. Thanks.
Good morning. Good morning. So I think I know pretty much most of you, but for those of you who don't, my name is Sabrina Charney Hull. I'm the Director of Planning. I've been with the town for about 7.5 years, working in the development department. So this project, I'm going to move a little bit forward just to give you, Ivy gave a great kind of overview and really drilled down as to the why. Here's a little summary. So in 2014, I recognized a lot of your faces because you were with me when we did the outreach for the comprehensive plan update. And I remember all of you and your assistance with my group at that time in creating a climate where we listened to the community and asked you what you liked about Newcastle, what you didn't like about Newcastle, and what were your solutions for making it a better place to live. So that's what happened in 2014. So as Ivy said, in 2017, that's when the town board adopted a comprehensive plan, or the update to the town's comprehensive plan. In this plan, we had policies that were derived from the public engagement. When Ivy said, the plan really said, put new development where you have the infrastructure, that directly related to many folks around town telling us they loved their single-family neighborhoods and they did not want to see new development or density in their single-family neighborhoods. So after the 2017 comprehensive plan, there was a list of policies and a whole bunch of action items, things that the town could do to reach those goals, the policies within the comprehensive plan. In 2018, the town board issued a moratorium on certain types of development within the Chappaqua Hamlet. They said, you know what, we really want to get a sense of the direction we want to go in. So they issued a moratorium that said no new building permits on spaces of 3,000 square feet or greater within the Chappaqua Hamlet. Right now, that moratorium is still in place. And it's in place as we go through this process to get a handle on what it is we want to become. In 2019, the town board hired the consultant team consisting of Kimley Horn, Tortagalis, Rest Group, and Joel Russell. These are the consultants that have been helping us draft the form-based code, working with myself and the Downtown Working Committee, really trying to get a sense of what is right for Newcastle, because we are not a one-size-fits-all. Okay, you can't take something that was developed for New Rochelle or White Plains and fit it into Newcastle. Okay, so we're looking at a customized legislation that works for our community. In 2019, the consultant team outreached to certain populations, the emergency services, the business community, the historical society, town employees, department heads of public works, my office, and other folks who were very involved in the community. We also held a couple of general outreach meetings to the community during the summer of 2019. We also, in May of 2019, kicked off the process with the Downtown Working Group. All of our meetings have been posted online at plannewcastle.us. And again, that larger community meeting happened in July. So this kind of gives you the steps that have been taken that have led us to the point in time where we are today. So just to kind of refresh, when we adopted the 2017 comprehensive plan, we looked at 5 general areas: livable built environment, harmony with nature, resilient economy. We looked at healthy communities and responsible regionalism. All of the policies within the comprehensive plan
are threaded throughout these 5 areas. And so when Ivy talks about developing where we have infrastructure, that not only is about protecting our single-family neighborhoods, it's about directing people to get out of their cars, develop where you can walk, develop where you have all of the services you need. So across all of these areas within the comprehensive plan, the actions that we're taking hit all of these targets, okay, which is really important in regards to the way people are living today. What is a form-based code? And so right now, we have a code that says you can do this type of use here. You can have a restaurant, you can have a retail store. Over here, you can have single-family homes. That is our zoning today. It is called Euclidean, and that's where you see initials like residential 1 acre, residential 4 acres. And what that means is you can have a house on a property that's the size of 1 acre. You can have one house on a property that has 4 acres. So it's a very formulaic approach to managing land use. Pretty much everywhere you go, except for Texas in the United States, has zoning, okay? No matter where you go, there are certain things that can happen where you're standing or not. We are looking at redoing that Euclidean zoning or that compartmentalism zoning, okay, where you can have this use here and this use here, and creating something that's called a form-based code. And this really, as Ivy said earlier, addresses the relationship of a property to the public realm, to the street in front of them, to the buildings on the side of them, to the properties across the street. It really looks at an area from a holistic perspective. The regulation itself is not just the code. Right now we have a code book that's about this big. It's black and white. It has a section of tables that say you can have this use. If you're going to put a building on your property, it needs to be set back from the property lines by X number of feet, and it tells you how tall it should be. There's no discussion of design. There's no discussion of architectural detailing. The form-based code regulation will include the standards like we have today. It will also include what's called a regulating plan. So it's not just the words, there's also a map or a diagram that says this is how your street should look. It has the setbacks in visual form, not just tabular form, and it really gives you a different way of interpreting how to place a building on your property. It also contains other visual tools, and I mentioned earlier the architectural detail, right? And we're not just saying everything should be one type of architecture. There is a range of architecture that is within the draft code that is representative of the architecture that is here today. Okay, and that's very important. This is not something that was taken from somewhere else. This is based off of what we have in Newcastle today. What is within the Chappaqua Hamlet today? So this is the zoning we have today in the Chappaqua Hamlet. We have planned industrial, we have business retail parking, we have a design business district up by Walgreens. This is what it looks like today. And within each of these areas, you have different uses that are allowed or not allowed. This also, part of the code today, says within the BR zoning district, you can have 3 stories on your building. Within the business retail parking, you can have 2 stories. And stories in our code today is defined by a calculation of the peak of your roof and the gutter line. So it's a mathematical calculation based on the overall height of what you're proposing and where it sits in relation to a number in the code. Okay, so this is what's there today. When we talk about a form-based code, we're not so much concerned about different uses, okay? There will still be use categories, but it is not the focus of this code. This is saying, let the market drive what we're going to have. As Ivy said, we're missing a huge range of housing. We have single-family homes. During that 2014 outreach and the 2017 comprehensive plan, folks came to us at our meetings and said, there's no place for me to go. My kids don't want to come back here. There's no place for them to live unless they're living in my house. I don't want to keep my house. I would like to stay in the community instead of going to Pleasantville or instead of going to White Plains. I want to live within my community, but I cannot continue to manage my single family home and my property. This is where our policies came out of differing our housing type. Differing the housing type also hits on that income. Different housing types are worth different dollars. That helps give more stratification within our marketability, within our living capacity, and it targets our age ranges. One of the problems that came out through the comprehensive planning process is that we have a very small pool of able-bodied volunteers for ambulance, for fire. We are at an all-time low when it comes to volunteer participation. We are an aging town. All of the demographics focus our most migrant, if you will, populations, are seniors and young people. We have a middle population. That's what we're dealing with now. So getting back to the form-based code, there's been a lot of discussion out there that this is a plan to redevelop town-owned property. This is not a plan to redevelop town-owned property. This is a plan with one of the primary goals of the comprehensive plan to revitalize the Chappaqua Hamlet, okay? To put feet on the street, as Ivy mentioned, and to really provide a diversity of residential opportunities. Town-owned land today is zone planned industrial. Today, we can put a battery energy storage system all throughout the parking lot if we want to. That's what the zoning says. That's not going to happen because it's held by the town, okay? It is important to understand that in order to truly get an understanding of the impacts of this legislation, we need to consider what could happen but may never happen on town-held property. If you look at the code, one of the biggest changes is changing the height of the buildings, okay? We're looking at 4 stories instead of 2 and 3 stories. It is not 4 stories everywhere. There's zoning within this pink that says between 2 and 3 stories. The purple is between 2 and 4. The only area of 5 stories that is being considered and being analyzed is on town-held property, around the circle, and when I say around the circle of the train station, widen that circle. In the middle of that circle is a flagpole. That flagpole is forever landmarked according to New York State, okay? So we can never change that. We wouldn't want to change it. Part of the planning process for coming up with the code was preservation and enhancement of the park that's in front of that train station. Okay, that is a very valuable community asset, and nobody wants to see it disappear. So the only area under private ownership that is allowed to go to 5 stories is around the Quaker Street Bridge, coming down off the bridge, and on both sides of that bridge. And there's only a little bit, if you look to the south of the bridge, where the Citibank Plaza is, that could become 5 stories. Thinking about why it's identified as 5 stories, and I'm going to kind of just get a little bit deeper as to the thought process of the downtown working group and the consultant team. When you look at the elevation of the bridge, it can handle 5 stories. When you look at projects that are already under construction, the Conifer project right off the bridge, that project will be taller than the bridge. This is about blending and creating a cohesive downtown to put feet on the street and to improve the business community. So what we need to do, we cannot just adopt code. Okay, in New York State, we have to undertake an environmental review. And this environmental review falls underneath the State Environmental Quality Review Act. The town board, as the lead agency who is considering this legislation, must examine the impacts, the worst, the most significant impacts of this legislation. Okay, because they have to make a decision, they need to know what the impacts of that decision is. the environmental review, SECRA, says that they have to balance environmental impacts with social and economic factors when deciding to approve or undertake an action. Okay, the action before us today is the form-based code. All right? The town board and the community at large, because you have a say in adoption of this code, you need to understand the impacts. We've heard a lot of impacts from the public right now, right? A lot of visual discussion, a lot of traffic discussion. We know that there will be impacts. The question is how much of an impact, okay? And that's what the SECRA analysis, the environmental impact statement, will help us identify. If you're interested in learning more about the SECRA process, this website will get you a whole host of information that is written so that the general public can understand it. And I think that that's important, so you can understand what the town board is actually doing at this point in the process. As Ivy said, we are at the infancy, okay? We are collecting all of the information so that we can analyze the impact it is going to have on the community. So here's an outline of the SECRA process. This is very hard to read, and I apologize. It's up here for demonstrative purposes only. The check marks are all the proper steps that the town board had to go through to get to the point where we are today. You know, they identified the action. They said we potentially have significant impacts, so we're going to classify it as a type 1 action under SECRA. And here we are right now, this circle. This is scoping. Okay, so basically the consultant team has provided the town with an outline for the environmental impact statement. This is called scoping. We then put that outline out to the community, out to all the professionals and the interested agencies, and we say, tell us where you think we should focus our attention. Now, we're focusing attention as professionals on the whole thing. But specifically, are there issues that you are concerned with? So this is to say we've done a lot. We have a lot more to do, okay? Because we're not getting, until we get to here, we're not done. And when I say we're done, at this point, we have a big report like this that says these are the impacts. This is what you need to do to what's called mitigate, or to make those impacts not so impactful. And then the town board will have to go over here, and it's not even on this slide, and make a decision about the legislation, okay? So this is all to say we're in the middle of a process. We're at the beginning of a really pivotal point in that process, and we have a long way to go. The action. So I spoke about it before. The action is the legislation. So this just talks about, in general, it's looking at the existing zoning within the Chappaqua Hamlet. It addresses 72 acres within the Chappaqua Hamlet. That's the area. And there's specific zoning districts that we're looking at. So we are not looking at changing residential, the R1 quarter or the R1 acre. We are not looking at changing single family zoning. We are looking at changing our commercial zoning, which is found within BR, BRP, BD, and IP, the planned industrial. We are looking for flexibility for development with the intent to revitalize the hamlet and create a sustainable and successful mix of commercial and residential uses, taking account of current and future real estate market and trends. Okay? So the biggest change between the 2017 comprehensive plan and plans that were created in the 1980s is the fact that we did not have the internet. Okay? The World Wide Web. That's the biggest foundational change that has happened in the world between the 1980s and 2017. The creation of the internet changed current and future real estate markets and trends. Okay? Amazon. How many deliveries come to your house every day? Okay? So taking into consideration the way we are living today and how it has been different than ever before. That's what our impact analysis needs to consider from that perspective. So I've been talking about the legislation. Part of the action will be what we call a build-out analysis, looking at the legislation and looking at the different levels of development that could occur based on the code, okay? not based on how much sewer capacity we have, but based on the details within the code, how much development can we expect? That build-out scenario will be pitted against our sanitary sewer limits, against our water supply limits, against our stormwater management limits, against our traffic limits, against our parking limits. We need to understand where that pivotal point is and what does that point look like, okay? Because we also have community character. We also want to maintain our community character. So all of this is the proposed action that will be tested against all of the infrastructure, economic, visual, character benchmarks so that we have a full understanding of the impacts. What is scoping? So I've been talking a lot about comparison against visual impacts. Well, scoping really focuses the environmental impact statement, okay? We know parking, we know traffic circulation, and we know visual. Maybe there is something else, okay? We won't know that until we get through this primary step of scoping. Okay, there may be somebody sitting out in this audience or in the community that knows something that we don't know. Okay, so that is why we entertain public scoping. So this is just kind of the standard 6 things of what scoping is. All right, right now we're trying to figure out all of the things we need to study in our environmental impact statement. These are all of the sections that are typically found within a scope or within an environmental impact statement. Land use, zoning, visual character, infrastructure, utilities, cultural resources, anything you can think of probably falls within one of these categories. Okay, it's very, very detailed. What we're asking for is to have you help us drill down within each of these areas now if you have particular concerns. How to write scope comments. So, we are, tonight is the second public scoping session. The scope is out for public comment right now. You may be sitting here today and you may ask questions that I say, oh, that needs to go into the scope. That is what we are doing right now. The town board is saying to you as the community, tell us what you're concerned with so we can make sure we're covering it in our study. So, the draft code is currently located at plannewcastle.us/rezoning. You can also access this site through mynewcastle.org. It's all up there. You can watch meetings of the downtown working groups. You can look at previous drafts of the code, but the current code is up there for review if you're interested in taking a look at it. You can read the scoping document. Right now, there's a track change document based on comments that I received through last Friday morning. It is up there for folks to look at and to figure out whether or not you want to add to it and send me new comments. And then to draft your comments, and you can submit them in written fashion to the town clerk at a town board meeting. You can email them to plan@mynewcastle.org. Or you can call me on the phone. So there's many different ways that you can submit your comments. So right now, tonight is the second public scoping session, and the town board has said that they will accept written comments or email comments until February 21st, 2020. PlanNewcastle.us is where you can find all of this information, phone numbers, other email contacts, and most importantly, the code that's being considered. And I urge all of you to take a look and to send me your feedback. So it worked very well when we were going through and updating the comprehensive plan. You folks, this community, told us what you wanted, and we created a document which you carried throughout the entire process, and it was the only time in my 25-year planning career when the town board was considering adopting that plan that there was a full house that was in support of an action the town board was undertaking. Okay, so the comprehensive plan was a document that you created, and it spoke to what you wanted for your community. We are carrying forward that document and trying to create better zoning to better reflect what you expect out of the Chappaqua Hamlet. So with that, I'm gonna turn it open to you to ask questions and tell us what you think. Yes.
As the environmental impact study goes on, if problems come up with traffic flow or something, that would mean that there may be changes to the number of stories. and
Absolutely.
such.
Absolutely.
And one other thing, like you said before, there's more and more deliveries due to Amazon.
Yes.
Well, the street's gonna be wide enough so that there's some place for the UPS truck to pull over it so that it doesn't block the street.
Yes, absolutely. Very good points. That will all be assessed in the EIS.
I think I would just say to add to that, and Lauren and Jason can certainly chime in on this as well. I don't think that the town board necessarily has preconceived notions at this point or is trying to ram through a particular version or draft of what we have in terms of the code at this point. I think we are very open to the questions that we've been getting from people, and I think we're very open to the results of the environmental impact assessment and to determining, as alternatives are presented to us in those results when they come back, I think we're very open to considering those alternatives and to making changes based on what we're hearing today.
Yes.
Is the scoping that you're doing now related to the secret process or just to your code proposal?
It's to the seeker process. Seeker requires us to examine the impacts of an action. So the scope relates to, think of the scope as the table of contents for the environmental impact statement. Okay? Anything that is in the scope will be examined. And, it's very general right now. I can tell you there are professionals who are looking at this and understand the level of detail. We're looking for specificity in your comments so that we can ensure that we're going to address everything.
So just taking it forward, do you have like an estimated timeline and what you think this process will get to before you get to?
I'm hopeful that we will have a draft impact statement by the end of June. I'm hopeful. I don't know if that will happen. It really depends on what we hear from you, how much the scope changes from what was expected, and the time it takes to pull the information together. We've done a lot of analysis in the Chappaqua Hamlet. A lot of traffic analysis has been conducted. We updated all of our infrastructure and our sidewalks just recently, so we have a lot of that utility information. We have visual analysis that has been ongoing since we started the project. It's a matter of pulling it all together and making sure all the questions are answered so that we understand what the full breadth of those impacts are.
So I think it's like a little bit of a balancing act too, right? It's we're under a moratorium, so there's no development that can happen currently, and we know that there's interest. So we know that there are property owners who are interested in doing something and they can't right now, right? So that's not good for us. We want to get out from under the moratorium. At the same time, I feel a great weight of responsibility to make sure that we get this right. So the current zoning was passed in the 1970s. Yeah. It has been in place for 40 years. We're trying to create something that is a lasting code that can reflect the changes and the path that we see this community on for the next 20, 30, 40 50 years. So it's a balancing act. We want to hurry, but we also really want to get it right. So we're taking the time to be deliberate and thoughtful about how we do it.
Yes.
How much do you anticipate this will increase the population and specifically increase the school age population?
I don't know yet. I would be misinformed if I was to answer that question today. Ask me again when the EIS comes out. I mean, seriously, there will be.
What is the EIS?
The scoping document, the impact analysis. We know that changing the zoning does change the potential number of new residents in the community. It changes the potential number of school-age children in the community. The question is how much, exactly what you asked. I hope to be able to answer that question definitively when the scoping document produces the environmental impact statement, and we understand if there are, I'm throwing this out there, I don't know if it's true, if it's 1,000 new residences and on average people are having 1.5 children per household, let's say it's 800 households or 500 households. So do the math. 500 households, 1.5 children, there's the number of school-age children, what school district they're in. We are working with the Chappaqua School District to understand their population and what their expectations are and whether or not it would be an impact. That's how that works. If the school district says we don't have the capacity for that, then the town board has that information to potentially limit the height of the buildings and limit the number of new residences that can be created. But it's not until we have the documentation of all of that information that they can make an educated decision on balancing those impacts.
Don't you think we ought to start at the end and then figure out how to get there?
Well, that's
You're
what
going on a trip, you know where your destination is, and then you figure out what the best path is to get there.
and I'm going to tell you
I think
this.
these are the two biggest issues with this whole plan, which sounds great, but you don't really know what the impacts are going to be. And if you don't even have some basic guidelines about how much you want the town population to increase, what the increase in school-age children is going to be, and also, more importantly, you talked about the aging population of Chappaqua. How is this plan going to help continue to motivate people to move to Chappaqua? There's a very interesting article about what's happening in the Katona, Lewisboro School District, and how the population is declining dramatically, and Peekskill, where it's exploding, and the two challenges, whether you're increasing dramatically or decreasing dramatically. So my comment would be, I think you need to know where you want to end up, and then figure out how you want to get there, what the best way is.
So I think your comments are very valuable. One of the things I want to say is the proposed zoning is based on where the town board thinks they want to go. Okay? The heights of the building, the potential uses of the properties, that is all based on what they think they want the community to be. Attached to that is the build-out scenario. So that's when you get the calculations of what does this generate? And is this a realistic number? Okay? So all of that is the basis of what will be studied in the impacts. I can't answer you today as to what that is, but prior to undertaking this analysis, that information will be produced.
At that point, will there be another set of meetings to discuss where we go from there?
Absolutely.
Do you really envision there's gonna be a lot of residential building? Don't we need services as opposed to,
We do.
More people.
We need mixed use. We need services that people go out of their homes for today. It's not the same as what they went out of their homes for prior to the internet. We need new residents. We need different types of residences. We have single-family homes, mostly.
what, again, how many? What's the thought process about how many more residences?
Well, we have zoning that was derived through about a year, maybe half a year, 3/4 of a year of researching. Okay? We know what capacities of sewer systems, of water systems are. We have a code that meshes with that. We need to determine what the impact of that is. How many?
Yeah.
How many? How much water does it
And
use?
also, exactly, I couldn't really understand the picture, because it's too far, I guess, the map.
Mhm.
Where is the 4-story section?
Let's go back. So, the 2 to 4 is in the purple.
Exactly what,
So it goes just past, this is the corner of North Greeley. Here's the post office over here. This is up surrounding, this is the Walgreens shopping center up here.
So I think I would just add two things related to this. First of all, what you're seeing here in terms of a picture, excuse me, this is an overview for the purposes of this presentation. You need to actually look at the draft of the code itself, because the reason I'm telling you to do that is that we actually have, within this overview, identified 16 different, is it 16 or 15? I think it's 16. We're going to go with 16. We've identified 16 different blocks, and each of those blocks actually has different requirements associated with it with regard to the height of the building, the setbacks, the frontage, so how much of that block can actually be built out. So you have to actually dig into the details to be able to understand when we say 2 to 4, what does that mean within that particular block? Is that a 2? Is it a 2 to 3? Is it a 3 to 4? And how much density then can actually be built in addition to the scale, the height, how much density can exist on that block as well. So that's the first thing I would say. The second thing I would just say is to keep in mind that what we're talking about is zoning, not development. This isn't a development plan. We're not saying that all of this will be built. What we're saying is that the underlying zoning would allow for that if those property owners were all to be interested in building out to the maximum. And we know that that doesn't actually
Right,
exist.
and this isn't a code for everybody to maximize development on their lots.
So does the town own all the property between the train tracks and North Greeley, for instance?
This is town property, this is town property, this is the train station,
Not the other end?
this is town
The other
property.
side.
No,
Talking
North
about
Greeley.
North Greeley, no. We own one lot across from Susan Lawrence.
The parking
The
lot.
parking lot is under town ownership. You have a Verizon substation there
Right.
that it will always be there, and you have the post office.
What about on the other side of the street from those?
That is privately held.
Uh-huh.
There is
That's all been
MTA
developed.
right of way because of the train track, but then there is private ownership.
The concern here, we live in the same development, we're at 149 K
Oh,
Street.
good.
Yes, we've heard from you. You're concerned about your views out the back. We absolutely know.
All right.
And that's an example, by the way, when
Yes.
we talk about scoping document and the kinds of questions that we want to elicit from the public, that's a perfect example of the kind of question that we're looking for. I live at 149. I want to understand what the views are going to be, what the sight lines look like from my property onto what could be built on North Greeley. That's a perfect question. We've captured that. That will be
That's already
included.
been.
It's already in
so
there,
We don't have to do
yes.
it again.
Do not.
And then the alternatives will exist. Okay, so under the current proposal, we're looking at 4 stories existing across the street on North Greeley. So what would that look like? We'll have an analysis done, and we'll look at an alternative. What would it look like if it were 3 stories instead of 4 stories? So that data comes back, then you and I look at it together, and we say, okay, which one of these makes sense for us as a community? And that's the process that we're going through right now.
I don't think if it blocked the view of the train, that would be a problem.
Yes.
So it seems to me that you're basically giving the owners of properties a license to develop and a license to build whenever they want. And have you thought about how you're going to manage ongoing construction? Because not every property owner is going to be developing their property at the same time.
Correct.
So you could have a scenario where for 10 years, you're going to have construction in downtown Chappaqua going on constantly. We just went through 2 years of the whole downtown being under construction and all of the impact that created. Looks fine now, but wasn't for a long time. So while you're saying that not everybody is going to max out, what if they do? Or what even if they don't max out to 4 stories? What if they decide to make it 3 stories or 2 stories? So I'm not sure what the height of the buildings, other than views, which are important, really have to do. To me, it's more, you're giving people a license to build. And there are no time constraints or time mandated periods when people can do that. So this could be ongoing for years and years and years of construction. So what's the impact of that?
And I'm going to say that that is a great comment that relates to the environmental impact statement where we are looking at construction impacts. So the timeframes and the timelines. You have to understand, as I said before, this is not a development plan, and it does not give license to every property owner to develop to the maximum extent on their property. There are requirements. The code outlines parking requirements. It outlines setbacks. Your property may not be conducive to taking advantage of this code. If it is, you need to comply with what is expected from construction and those impacts that were assessed in the EIS to make sure you're not disruptive to the street, to your neighboring property owners, and so forth. That's all going to be analyzed.
Construction, by its nature, is disruptive.
I understand that, and there are certain tolerances. There are tolerances for noise. Those are also regulated in other sections of the town code today. So those sections of the town code still exist. This is zoning, and there are other town code requirements: tree protection, wetland protection, parking, that all are still into play. Noise, construction, all of that still exists today and requires to be complied with.
Is the town considering building more parking or garage somewhere near the beginning of this project, so that as construction goes on, there's someplace to park?
That's a good question. Do you want to take it? You want me to take it? Because we've been chatting about this, so.
Here, let's stand up. Keiko and I are local architects here. We've lived in town for 30 years, so we have an emotional investment in what this can become. Direct response to your question, I would certainly advocate for that as a going forward immediate intention, create some additional parking so that these parcels, that there are some parcels that are landlocked who cannot build parking on their property and yet would like to build apartments. And so to see this happen for enough of the properties, I think a parking solution should be part of it. That's still a debate, so I would certainly advocate that. While I got the floor, maybe I'd add, we are the architects for the building at the top of the hill, 91 Bedford, across from Walgreens. And we're very proud of that building. The Tabalachis are the developers. They live here in town. They have a great investment in the community too. We've kind of seen that as maybe an example of what this code could produce. We took great pains to make a traditional looking building out of that. The current code would not require that. The current code, moratorium in place at the moment, would have allowed somebody to build anything, and there would have been no guidelines for what that would look like, how that would fit into the community. So we're very excited about what this form-based code will create, because it gives far more guideline, produces in all likelihood a far more comprehensive character for the community. So we're very excited about that. Chuck Napoli's here. I know Chuck is very interested in how the character of the community, Chuck's an architect too, so we all share that same interest and excitement maybe for what this can create. A couple of great points. We live at the top of the hill near the building we're doing, and so I see the merchants in the stores, the Walgreens and neighboring stores there, and they're very excited to see that building getting done and knowing that there are going to be 14 new households living there near their stores. So the merchants in town are very, in my experience, in direct conversations, are very interested in seeing more people living right in town and become, consumers, shoppers at their stores. And that, I think, has been the biggest benefit of looking at downtown. Now, downtown is struggling. We all know that. It's very difficult to get a diversity of stores and get, because there's so few people living there. So we're very excited about the chance that this brings people into downtown, and I think the merchants are going to be very supportive of it, and it'll create a greater diversity of the stores. Lastly, the diversity of housing. I really appreciate Ivy and Sabrina's points about that. There's a study, I mentioned this to Ivy before, there's a study from the 2000 to 2010 census where Newcastle lost about 60% of its population between 25 and 35 years old. That is college graduates, young adults, young families. There was an actual decline in the population of that amount, and that's because there's no affordable housing, not in the affordable government definition, but just affordable less than $1 million housing. Very little of that available. So this kind of housing will create the opportunity for young families, young adults to stay in the community, as well as for empty nesters. So we see this as a key to recreating the vitality of downtown, and very excited to contribute our efforts to try to make this really work for everybody. So thank you.
How do you know it'll be affordable housing?
It's
not
not about
affordable.
affordable, meaning like county standards for affordability. It will be different economics because you're not necessarily building single-family homes.
Well, I'm new to the community. I lived in Bronxville, and the building they did along the train tracks is very not affordable. It's condos well over $1 million, so, and it's built for empty nesters. That was the reasoning behind it. So I'm just wondering if the,
Well, there will be, the town does have affordability requirements, so
So you do?
we do have those requirements, absolutely, but on its face, it's different type of housing. There will be market rate units, there will be affordable units, there will be workforce units. So, we have to comply, and we want to comply with county and state requirements to provide housing of different economics for the community. Yeah.
I'm also a proud member of 149 King Street, and I'm glad that we're represented here today. I will say that I work in Mount Kisco, I live here, and I understand the needs that we're going through. There's no question about that. My bedroom faces where the supplies were for the construction for the last 2 years. Anyone who lives out of town had to come into town and go through whatever horrors they had to go through. They started around 9 or 10 o'clock at night to set up their spaces. Each truck has a backup whistle for the entire night. Now, this is not funny, because 2 years, I can't believe that it took 2 years. 2 years every single night, the metal plates that were moved, the trucks that were moved, the manpower, the lights coming into our bedroom. This is an incredible issue. And, normally I don't complain, it ended up looking really nice, but that was 2 years.
Right, and I'm gonna say to you, to me, and I'm jumping ahead because I've done this before, it may mean that the person who's developing their lot may not prep their site,
Right.
prep their equipment, or construct past 6 p.m. All right, I'm just throwing that out there. But because you are telling us that now, I can put those qualifiers in the analysis to make sure that that type of restriction is considered when this code is adopted, or when it's being considered to be adopted. Your comment is very valuable.
But I mean, just the word alone might, doesn't guarantee us anything. On the other hand, as far as the landlords, the people that actually put up their money to purchase these properties, right now I see preparation going on some of the properties out my back window now. There was a tree taken down that now opens up right to Walgreens' backyard, which I wasn't aware if they've taken out a tree permit. I don't understand. It started at 6 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday. And, I don't know if people are following the rules. The construction downtown, I think, had a lot to do, the management of downtown has to do a lot with the town board. I mean, they have to have a handle on these things. For that to take 2 years is just, I don't know if that was ever planned, that's just wrong. But as we give the property owners permits. We need to restrict that. I know that you're gonna say that we're gonna move it forward, but we all need to know that. All these things here have the buildings, the possibility of 3 to 5 or 2 to 4. 2 to 4 can be 100% increase from 2 to 4. That's a pretty wide range.
I also encourage you to take a look at what exists today. When you walk from 149 King Street, the next time you take a walk up the hill towards Walgreens, go to Lang's, get a cup of coffee, take a look at what exists today. Because a lot of those buildings, and that's what I've been doing as I walk down the hill to get here. And take a look at what exists today in terms of the number of stories that exist there today.
No,
The things that can be built as of right today.
You know what, I did look at that.
Yeah.
And I do understand it.
Yeah.
You know, but now.
I didn't mean that for you personally, I mean for everybody.
As far as
No
the
disrespect.
people who purchase the properties, the landowners, it's great to have Tavalachis, I know them, they're really good people.
Mm-hmm.
And they're cognizant of everything that's going on. But people have purchased these properties with the old zoning in place, or the current zoning in place, even though there's a moratorium. What type of lawsuits may be derived from their rights as property owners to go the 3 stories and then whatever it happens to be? I mean, where are we gonna stand as far as that's concerned? I mean, this could be pretty complex, I'm sure.
I don't want to give the impression that 149 King Street is against this the plan.
I'm not hearing
Certainly,
that.
one of the reasons we all moved there, I think, is because it is convenient to town, and we can walk to town, and we can walk to the post office, and walk to restaurants, and walk the dog around town. So we certainly want a nice downtown and other shops and stores, but we're just bringing up the concerns in the hope that it gets done right.
And we want to do it right. And I do want to say something. If somebody's cutting down a tree at 6 a.m. on a
Right.
Sunday,
They were doing it all day.
Right.
well, right. I mean, but my office does issue permits. We do have tree removal permits that need to be taken out. If somebody is doing something on the weekend and town hall is closed, call the police. Jason.
Two things. The first thing is, for me, there are 3 documents that I found worthwhile of reviewing. First one is the actual plan that's being proposed for the form-based code. Right? I know it's a thick document. The first 40 pages or so have the bulk of the information you'd want to see and feel, and it really gives you a feeling of what's going on. But that document is very worthwhile to at least look through. The second one is the one that we're mostly here for, which is this draft EIS, right? To go and take a look at what things should we be looking at to see what the impact is if we were to go forward with this zoning, right? So again, that's a relatively mid-sized document. It's not going to take a lot of reading. A lot of the comments that were even brought up here were brought up in the past, and they've now been incorporated. And I've been watching as our town board keeps getting updates on this draft EIS, and so every new comment that
Draft
comes in.
scope for the EIS.
Sorry, scope.
Yeah, yeah.
Sorry, the scope for the EIS continues to be everything that's been said continues to be added. And the third one, which I found the most fascinating. So as part of this process, the town hired a group called Res Group, right? So it's a real estate analysis, a company that does real estate analysis. And they went through and tried to help us figure out what should we be looking at for our town when it comes to both commercial, retail, and residential properties, and looking specifically at our downtown area, and to go and say, well, what are other towns looking at? How do you go and make a town vibrant and successful and so forth? And all of that information's in that analysis. So I highly recommend it. It kind of gave me personally a better understanding of some of the whys, like why is transit-oriented housing valuable, right? And what that's going to do for our town. How do we go, even within the form-based code, there are pieces that go and talk about, as Sabrina said, discussing about the true nature of affordable housing, workforce housing, and market rate housing, and the ratios between them. So I highly recommend looking through those 3 documents. I think they're very important. One other point I do want to make, just again, it was interesting to me. If you go and you take a look at that, most of that pinkish area up there, that is currently, and correct me if I'm wrong, currently zoned for 3-story housing, right? And so at any point in time, any of those people who own those properties, right, can again go to the planning board, go to the and propose doing what they like with the property that they own. And so part of this process is to go and make sure that the things that anyone who owns property within this hamlet actually conforms to certain standards that we'd like to see, to go and make sure, and again, as Ivy did a great job and Sabrina did a great job of explaining how the town should look and feel with setbacks and certain face types of buildings and so forth. I think it's a kind of an important piece, but a lot of this could already be, some of these pieces could already be done with a lot less control and understanding of what this is going to look like, right? Look and feel, and that's why the form-based code is such an interesting utility to look at. If that makes some sense.
Thanks.
Does this address building codes from an environmental standpoint, like eliminating fossil fuel use for any of the new construction or largely renovated construction, or any of those kinds of issues?
Yeah, we are, the seeker analysis requires us to look at alternatives, we are a climate smart community, looking at how if gas is restricted and you cannot connect to natural gas, what are your alternatives? We have green building requirements in our code. We are looking at enhanced green building codes. As I said, this code does not replace other code requirements. So it all needs to be considered with the development in the environmental impact statement. It needs to be considered so that we understand what those impacts might be.
Did that answer your question?
Sort of, but not really. I mean,
Okay.
there's nothing in place right now that says you can't have natural gas, you can't have, heating oil or that kind of stuff. Will these buildings be required to use heat pumps or solar or something like that, or have solar incorporated into them and have basically a neutral carbon footprint?
So, I mean, my answer to that would be, so what Sabrina's talking about is, we're talking about zoning here. We have a separate green building code. We're thinking about and talking about in a parallel discussion, how do we jumpstart the
Okay. It seemed important
enhancement
to me to,
of that
before you
code?
unleash this, to have the other part in place.
Okay. Yep. Hi.
Hey, I'm Chuck Napoli, and Bill just left, but I've been here 50 years, so I got a couple of years. And I've lived and worked in my own hometown for 50 years, and too, love where I live. And I don't want to, and I'll defend where I live, and I'll go to the wall defending this town for a warm, welcoming, friendly, intimate, classy village. And I'm going to say that anything that causes it to not be those attitudes, and I use the word be, that's the way I want it to be, and I think we have to think about how we want it to be. And somebody said, you ought to start at the end and then work back. Well, yeah, starting at the end is having something that you want, having something that defines and clearly expresses the answering of the needs of us, fine. So with that said, if you gave me the problem of redesigning this town with the thousands of possibilities and permutations and the code and the height and the setback, it's almost like, it's almost an impossible thing with so many variables to worry about. It's got to be an incredibly hard job. And what the reason it's so hard is because you've said this is how much we could have. We could fill up that parking lot. We could fill up how many acres is town-owned property of the 72?
72.
Of the town property in this map, how many is town-owned?
10. I think it's 10, right? About 10.
The parking lot is 7. Just one parking lot is 7. How can it be 10?
Because
There's other parking lots.
Yeah, that's what I mean. The town-owned
it's more
property.
than 10.
So we don't know off the
it's
top of our
probably
heads. We
less
can,
than
we
10.
can get back on it.
Between
Okay.
7 and 10, Chuck.
So let me get this, at least get me, and then I'll be finished, but maybe. There is 7 acres of town-owned property out of the total 72 that we're talking about exploring?
Ball fields.
Yeah, I don't know the number off the top.
Yeah, I don't know.
Probably about right. The school.
So without knowing that off the top of our head, what's the related question?
There's a lot of purple around the train station and down at the parking lot.
That's not all town.
It's not.
Yes, it is.
Yes, it is. For most of it. There's private property here
Only a little bit.
and here. There's private property here. This is publicly owned. Behind here is publicly owned.
Yeah, yeah.
Over here is
Okay.
publicly
At
owned.
least 30.
So even if it was half and half, it doesn't matter. But there's an awful lot of this plan that is my land and your land. It's ours.
Publicly owned.
Publicly
We own it, yeah, we are. We
Correct.
We have certain rights, to its development. However, it would be great, and here's what I'm really asking for, it would be really great if you would start off with a legitimate or a physical plan, an exact physical plan, not a probable, not a guess, not a range, but an exact physical plan that answered all our needs, because you've got all the needs, you've got all the wants, you've got all the restrictions. Show me, is there a plan, a physical plan of the build-out that you're talking about? And the reason I say that is that if there were a physical plan, and there were buildings, and there were heights, and there were courtyards, and that we could look at and see, we could say, wow, I really like that, and that's what I really want.
Pictures of-
And then you write a code based on the physical plan. So you start at the end of it and design what you want, how you want it to look, where you want stuff, because you've got all the data. And then when everybody says, hey, that looks great, guess what? That's when you write the code. That's when you do the EIS, and that's when you do all the other stuff. So the whole thing starts with a physical plan, a 3-dimensional physical plan that we could all look at, make a model of it, put it out in the hallway and say, this is what our town could look like. Do you like it or not? And I think you could solve a whole lot of problems, get the thing done a lot quicker, starting off with a real live, physical, doable, functional plan that we could all look at and evaluate. And so my question is there a physical plan now that we're writing code to, or are we writing a broad-based, basic code in which we're gonna put future physical plans into? And I know the answer. So there is no physical plan that I've seen, and I really just wish we could get one.
Because it might never get that way, though. Like, this is,
Yeah, I hear you, but it would be something that at least we could all look at and say, I don't want that part of that plan, this is what I really want, and then we could decide what we really want.
Did we have those renderings at the July meeting?
There are renderings, correct.
That happens to be a
But it's
picture of
not
the
a-
front,
yeah,
it doesn't
yeah.
show where the parking is, doesn't show, there's a lot of stuff that's missing from that attitude,
Mm-hmm.
but there's a lot of things that have to be solved. Well, you could use those drawings, and then at the same time tell us, okay, this will be the plan. Now, show me where the parking is. Show me where the garbage pickup is. And show me the other necessary things that go with a building. Because a building is just not a front. There's also a back. And the question is, what is that back looking like, and who's looking at the back? If you know what I'm getting at. So true physical plan is the beginning of, on which the form-based code is based. We don't have that physical plan, or we do, and you guys, the town board has created the physical plan that you're working off of. If you're working off of a physical plan, show us the plan you're working off of.
You have access to all of the documentation that we have.
I haven't seen
The
a
town
physical
board's not
plan.
withholding anything
No,
from you.
No, you've created an attitude or a physical plan in which you are now working out.
Right, so I go
So
back
is
to
there a
the,
plan is my question, that's all.
I just would go back to the comment that I made earlier, which is the difference between a development plan and zoning, right? So what we are doing here is we are changing the zoning. We are not creating a master development plan that speaks to what will be developed with certitude on all of the property that we've identified. If there comes to be, and I just want to, there's a misconception, and Sabrina touched on it earlier, that what we're trying to do here is to create a plan that would move forward with the sale of the publicly owned property that is around the train station today, as if we are marching towards that with certitude. That is not what is happening here. This is not a plan to sell off the public property. As you correctly identified, that is not the town's property to sell. That is the public's property. That is your property, and it is my property, and it is every resident of this town.
Yep.
If we determined in the future that we wanted to be able to sell that land, to develop the train station parking lot, to build housing there, to build a civic center, to build a community center, et cetera, that would go out for a public, I know you know this, but for everyone else, that would go out to a public referendum. We would all have to vote and assert that as a community, that is what we want to do. That master development plan for the train station parking lot, for the public land, does not exist at
Is
this
there
time.
a master plan for our downtown? A physical master plan for downtown? Is it, where is that community center? Where is that recreational thing? Where is that cultural thing that everybody's talking about? Well, put them down on paper and then see what the impacts are. Impacts good, bad, hey, if it works, that's the code that we shoot for the future. I'm just telling you the process of design thinking. You start not with a nebulous bunch of what's possible. No, you come up with something that's really physical, and then out of that, with the help of the community, fine tune it. Then you write the code. The thing you do last is you write the code for what we want. Right now, you're writing a code for what we don't know what we're gonna get. So it's it's a hard job, what you're doing. It's a tough job, because there's so many variables. Show me a building with a front yard and where it is. You know, if you go up North Greeley, where all of those, you know what? If you go back 20 or 30 feet, that leaves you another only 20 or 30 feet for a building, and it doesn't have any cars. I mean, that gets narrower and narrower and narrower. And so, to say that's gonna be 4 stories, I don't think it'll ever be 4 stories, especially not on a tiny little piece of land that's 30 feet or 40 feet wide, which was a house. So here's our town planner. I'm requesting the town planner to come up with a couple of plans, or get me and Bill and a few other architects in town, and we'll come up with 4 more plans that we could look at.
And I think there will be the opportunity to do that in the future if the community has an appetite for that kind of development on public land.
Wait a
Chuck,
second,
I want to.
But you're telling us that you're writing a code to it.
We are writing a code, and we are changing the zoning for that property today. Today, that property is zoned as industrial, right? That train station parking lot land.
Well, you're also looking at the rec field too.
Correct.
And you got all of that property you're playing with, and you're writing a code for a whole bunch of property that it's almost like.
We are changing zoning. We are not creating a development plan.
But
for
this
that property.
particular zoning is law, and this is not a guideline, it's not a maybe, this is law. And it says that property is a 5-story building or a 4-story building. And by the way, that's not a baseball field anymore. That's an apartment building, or not. So somebody should show me.
If I may, for a moment, Chuck, I appreciate your comments, I do. And I appreciate the charge that you give me as the Director of Planning for the community. I am fulfilling a process that was established by the town board in doing this. Let me finish.
Yep.
The proposed action is not just the code. The proposed action includes a build-out scenario. That build-out scenario is based on the code, but it is also based on the comprehensive plan goals, okay? During the comprehensive planning process, the community said, we don't want to develop rec field, okay? That was something that the community wanted to preserve.
Right.
I can tell you that the build-out scenario probably won't put a building on rec field, even though it could potentially be zoned for something else. There will be a build-out scenario. Those documents will be posted. The town board will be given a report on that build-out scenario. That may be the plan that you are looking for.
That's a good, yeah.
Okay, but I don't have that right now. It is under development based on the code. Okay? So I don't want you to think that we're just creating code without any bearings. There are bearings to this code. There absolutely are. There's the economic analysis that Jason spoke about, that report. There's the outreach documents that went into the comprehensive plan. There is the comprehensive plan. And now there will be a building analysis based on the code and what the code is setting forth to help us understand what the build out will be. It's a little bit different. It's not taking a property and saying, what do I want to do here and can I do it? It's saying, here's legislation, how would it apply? And so my directive is based off of a process that has been directed by the town board to try and put this together.
Yeah, well, you still say you're doing an overall framework, call it a framework, called the code framework, and that framework has pieces and parts. And that might be part, you might have a vision of what it should look like somewhere. You obviously have a vision of what that.
Otherwise, why are you changing the code if you have no vision? I mean.
Yeah, well, what are you writing a code to?
I came here thinking, oh, wow, this is great, you're expanding, and now I feel terrible about what you're doing.
I'm sorry, can you say more about?
Why I feel terrible?
Yeah.
You're not being honest about why you want this to be done.
About why we want this to be
The
done?
change of zoning, it feels very manipulative.
Okay,
You're not saying how many units, you're not saying how many people you want to bring in, how you're going to keep young people here. What in this zoning is going to do this stuff?
Okay, so I hear you on that, and I would just take you back to where we are in terms of the timeline. So what we're doing right now is we're eliciting the questions that allow us to put together the environmental impact assessment that will answer those questions, and so that when it comes in,
Well, you don't
we
even
can
need
make
it
a
if you don't know why
determination.
you're building it. I agree with all these people's comments. You're not being honest about why you want to change the zoning at all.
Okay.
Were you here at the beginning when I was speaking? I don't know.
Yeah,
if you
I
want
mean,
to-
it's all general, but not specific. How many units you want?
So
what size
again,
units you
how
want.
many units the code would allow for is one of the things that'll come back as a result of the environmental impact
But
assessment.
how do you know
that
you
we
want
will-
5 stories if you don't know how many units you want? How do you know you don't want 10 stories?
And
Or
again,
2
that
stories?
analysis is what we're gonna have come back to us, and we're gonna be able to compare side by side. What does the maximum build-out scenario allow for if we have this many stories? What does it allow for if we have this many stories? And when that comes back, and when we have the public hearings that are associated with that, when it comes back, that's when the town board will be making decisions with regard to what we put into place. So we don't have all of the answers today, we will be getting those answers, and it will continue to be a transparent process so that everybody can come in and comment and talk to us about it. We're, again, not trying to ram anything through. We're trying to be thoughtful and considerate with regard to all of these questions as they're coming up.
Yeah, just regarding the question, the reason why this rezoning is happening comes from the comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan is, which was a community effort over the course of a number of years to go and say that we as a community, not me personally, we as a community would like to increase the density in the downtown hamlets where there is infrastructure. Right? That's some of the things that came out of the comprehensive plan for the town. So when it comes to why we're doing this, it's the output, it's one of the action items that came out of this, the comprehensive plan. Did I get that right? Or?
You did, and so look at this slide, okay? You read this slide. Livable built environment, promote use of alternative transit and facilities, a range of housing types, higher density while preserving and protecting historic resources. Okay, think about the historic resources in the Chappaqua Hamlet. The goal is to protect them. Harmony with nature, protect and maintain natural resources, protect and manage open spaces, ensure sustainable design that reduces the town's carbon footprint. Okay, that is one of the primary principles this code is going to be built on. Resilient economy, create vibrant, walkable, mixed-use area that has a sustainable mix of commercial and residential uses and increases patronage. Healthy community, expand, enhance, and maintain park and rec space, increase recreation program and facilities, improve linkages between open spaces and key destinations. Okay, we have a shuttle that runs from Chappaqua Crossing to the Chappaqua train station. Wouldn't it be nice to expand that shuttle to Millwood? All right, it is a free shuttle that runs during morning rush hour. There's a lunchtime service, and it runs during evening rush hour. Did we do a Saturday component to that? I think maybe Saturday morning? Maybe. But again, it's a shuttle, free, for anybody who wants to get on it. And it is our electric shuttle.
Yes.
Okay? So look at responsible regionalism. Align with regional sustainability objectives such as transit-oriented development, preservation of open space, and affordable housing. When you think about the Chappaqua Hamlet, you think about the open space that is there today. You think about the historic resources that are there today. I can assure you that the town's zoning will continue to protect them. Yes?
Why isn't the field designated as a recreational space instead of as a?
The town does not have
for-
zoning for open space. It just, there is no zoning for open space in the community.
Great idea.
That's what a form-based code says. This is open space, period.
So we have just a few minutes. Does anybody have a last question? So it's my intention to continue to have these kinds of public sessions in various sort of arenas. I would love to come talk to 149 King Street if you have any interest in having us there. If you all are a part of a community organization and would like us to come and speak with your organization, we would welcome the opportunity to continue this conversation in many different forums. As Sabrina mentioned, we're, at the sort of inception of the environmental impact assessment. And as that comes back in, we will be having public hearings on that, as well as eventually public hearings on legislation that the town board would adopt. So we have many more opportunities to continue this conversation. It's really incredibly valuable for us to get a sense from the community as to where there are questions and where there are concerns so that we can bake all of that into the analysis that's being done at this time. So again, all of these questions, all of these comments, we are thinking about them, we are recording them, we are building them into the assessment that we will be doing. I would just return to kind of where I started at the top. I really think that this is an exciting opportunity for us to be able to think about the future of the hamlet and to be able to meet those goals that we've identified in the comprehensive plan. And
I have a question.
Yeah.
Out on Greeley Avenue, after all this construction, you have these black poles that are about 3 feet high, and a lot of people think that that's for those who have horses to come in and tether. Are they for decoration? What is the purpose of that?
The bollards?
The bollards.
It's decoration.
It's decoration, right?
Lauren left.
Save your life so a car doesn't hit you on the sidewalk.
Right.
Yes, those are safety protections.
If the Dalton gang comes in to hit the bank, they'll probably tie their horses.
Yeah, right.
There you go.
So the New York State DOT, New York State Department of Transportation requirements for pedestrians around a crosswalk, and it's where the dropped curbs are, to make sure that you don't have a car that rounds the curb and mounts it by accident, to keep a protection there between pedestrians that are waiting on those corners to cross and the vehicular traffic that's making the curve. Because you don't have a curb there. It drops down, it's flush, so that you don't trip. And to make sure that a car, when it rounds that corner, doesn't mount the curb and take you out as you're waiting to cross, the bollards are there for your protection.
But they're on more than just the curbs. There's some.
They're on, right, but they're as the curbs drop down, and New York State DOT requires that they be there. Believe me, if they didn't require them, we wouldn't have them.
They're actually, they're very nice looking, but they're very impractical as far as trucks are concerned. And when you get down to the intersection, and we have the amount of trucks that are going to the post office now, since they have the contract with Amazon, it's not gonna stop anybody. But the cars, during the day, I can understand, or even slow them down or deflect, but they're not gonna stop the truck. And I know that from the other towns in Mount Kisco, everyone's been knocked over. You know, but anyway, if they required it and we did it, then we won't be sued.
So we're at the top of the hour. I want to thank everybody for being here. I really want to especially thank, though, our host from the League of Women Voters. Thank you all for arranging for this and helping to promote it. And, you know, if you all are not members of the League of Women Voters, I know they're doing their membership drive right now. This is a fabulous organization. They are nonpartisan. They work on for the benefit of all of us in terms of, you know, helping to disseminate information about all of the important issues that are going on around town. And they really take a very neutral, non-biased view of all of the issues that they tackle. They do tremendous work on our behalf. So I would encourage folks to take a look at their website, take a look at them.
They're also all volunteer.
Which is amazing. Thank you.
Thank you. So, before everybody leaves, we'd love to get contact information from you, email addresses, so that we could keep you, informed as to what's coming up. If you want to just, give us that information, that would be great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I read a word.